The Riverside Community Center looked tired on that Tuesday night, its paint peeling on the window frames, its fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead, casting a cold glow across the mismatched chairs set in a loose circle. A faint smell of burned coffee clung to the air, mixed with the sharp bite of floor cleaner. Outside, the hum of traffic on Fifth Street carried on as if nothing extraordinary waited to unfold inside. For the 12 veterans who gathered every week, this place was a lifeline, not glamorous, not well-funded, but steady, dependable, a pocket of understanding where their burdens did not need to be explained. Each man and woman bore invisible scars. Some carried them in their posture, some in their silence, others in their restless tapping of feet. Emma Carter had been coming for 8 months, always 5 minutes early, always sitting by the same window. Her presence was unremarkable at first glance. She wore coveralls that still smelled faintly of motor oil. Her fingers bore the dark stains of a mechanic, her brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She seemed ordinary, quiet, easily overlooked, but the others had learned over time that when she spoke, she did so with a quiet gravity that made people lean forward. Her words carried the weight of someone who had lived through things too heavy for most. That night, the fragile rhythm of the group cracked. Robert Hayes, a broad-shouldered man whose belly stretched his old service T-shirt, dominated the conversation. He leaned back in a chair, painting pictures of daring missions in Afghanistan, convoy ambushes survived by his cleverness, enemy fortresses stormed single-handed, each tale louder and more absurd than the last. His voice filled the room, his gestures wide, and a few of the veterans chuckled politely, though many exchanged uneasy glances. Emma listened, her jaw tight, her eyes narrowing with each new exaggeration. She had heard enough men turn memory into theater, rewriting pain into glory, and when Robert finally claimed to have stormed a Taliban compound alone, Emma spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the air. That is not how missions work, she said. There are plans, there are teams, there are backup and extraction points. War is not a game. The room went quiet, a silence so heavy it pressed on the walls. Robert sneered, leaning toward her, his voice dripping disdain. What do you know, mechanic? You fix cars. You are no soldier. Leave the war stories to those of us who fought. The other veterans glanced at her, some with curiosity, some with doubt. They all knew she worked at the auto shop downtown, always covered in grease, always quiet, never talking about her past. But Emma did not flinch. She held Robert's gaze. I know because I was there, she said. Syria, 2019. Our team was sent to infiltrate a compound outside Raqqa. Intelligence said hostages were inside, but the intel was wrong. It was a trap. Her hand rose to her collarbone, brushing unconsciously against the scars hidden beneath her flannel shirt. 3 pale lines that only those who looked closely would notice. The air shifted in the room. Curiosity mingled with disbelief. Emma had never shared details before. She had always kept her history vague. Her voice now had the clipped precision of a mission briefing. Robert barked a laugh, loud and dismissive. So what? You expect us to believe you were some kind of Navy SEAL? Women cannot even pass that training, let alone fight in combat units. Emma's eyes locked onto his, steady, unwavering. She said, my call sign was Phantom. The circle erupted, half laughter, half tense silence. Some leaned back, uncomfortable. Others shook their heads. Robert pulled out his phone, tapping furiously. Stolen valor is a crime. He said, I will report you right now. Emma sat perfectly still, her breathing measured, her face calm, her hands clasped in her lap, her voice steady as she spoke again. You want to know what combat is? It is not medals and glory. It is not the stories you tell to impress. Combat is watching a teammate bleed out in your arms while you are bound to a chair. It is months in a concrete cell, so small you cannot stand. It is eating insects to survive while they try to break you with water, wires, fire. It is killing 3 guard with a broken stone just to crawl miles through hostile ground with your shoulder out of place and blood in your lungs. And when you return, it is being told none of it happened, that you do not exist. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Robert's mocking grin faltered. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. And then the doors burst open. The crack of splintering wood echoed like a gunshot. Military police stormed in, their boots pounding the floor, their voices sharp, their weapons raised. Nobody moved. One barked. In a blur of motion, Emma was seized, rough hands yanking her arms behind her back. The coffee mug she had set beside her chair shattered against the floor, spilling its dark liquid like blood across the tiles. Emma Carter, you're under arrest for fraud and stolen valor. The veterans stared in shock, frozen in their seats. Emma did not fight. Her face remained calm, her breath even. Only her eyes betrayed the faint flicker of something deeper, resignation perhaps, or anticipation, as if she had expected this moment to come. They dragged her through the door, the cold air from outside rushing in for a brief second, and then she was gone, swallowed into the night. A mechanic on paper, an ordinary woman in the eyes of her neighbors, but something else entirely behind the scars hidden on her skin, something that the world had tried to bury. As the police vehicle pulled away, Emma caught her reflection in the glass. What stared back was a 34-year-old mechanic who lived in a small apartment above a Chinese restaurant. Someone plain, someone forgettable, someone no one would believe had been a warrior. But she knew better. The scars on her body told a story erased from records, buried in files marked too secret to exist. And somewhere far away in a secure building that officially had no name, Admiral Michael Torres would soon receive a call that would change everything. Detective Michael Coleman leaned back in his chair, the dim glow of the desk lamp spilling across a mountain of papers that refused to align into any coherent sense. The clock above his desk ticked toward 3 in the morning. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he could not stop staring at the case file that had come to define his every waking thought. Emma Carter sat in custody, charged with stolen valor, accused of fabricating service records that did not exist. She should have broken within hours. Every fraudster he had ever encountered had collapsed under the simplest pressure. They slipped when asked about basic procedures. They fumbled when pressed on ranks. They stumbled when someone asked them about the small details of service life. It was always the little things that exposed them. But Emma was different. In the interrogation room, she had sat calm, her posture steady, her eyes focused, her responses sharp. He had tried the old tricks, throwing nonsense jargon at her to see if she would latch onto it in an attempt to prove authenticity. "So tell me about tactical soup sandwiches in the field," he had said, leaning back with the smug confidence of someone who had caught a liar before they even knew it. She had looked at him like he had grown another head. "Detective," she said evenly, "there is no such thing. That is movie talk. A soup sandwich means something is a complete disaster. But no one puts tactical in front of it. Are you trying to test me? Or do you just not know what you were talking about?" Coleman remembered the heat that had rushed to his face in that moment. Strike one for him. Strike one for the assumption that this woman was a fraud like all the rest. By the second day, he had called for reinforcement. Sergeant Major Patricia Hayes from the local recruiting office, a veteran of 3 tours, a woman hardened by years of service. Surely she could expose this imposter. For half an hour, Hayes had grilled Emma relentlessly, firing question after question about everything from basic training to advanced tactics. Emma answered without hesitation, her words carrying the casual precision of someone who had not memorized information from a book, but who had lived it. "Describe the sound of incoming mortar fire," Hayes demanded. "That depends on distance and angle," Emma replied. "Close ones sound like a freight train rolling through thunder. Distant ones whistle first, high-pitched and sharp before the impact, but the worst ones, the ones that fall directly on top of you, they do not whistle at all. They just arrive." Hayes had gone pale, later pulling Coleman aside, her voice shaking. "Ray," she whispered, "I have been in this army almost 2 decades. I have heard mortar fire more times than I care to remember." What she said, the way she described it, that is not something you can read in a book. She knows because she has been there. Either she is the most devoted liar in the history of fraud, or she is telling the truth. Coleman had no answer. He could only watch through the glass as Emma sat, calm, still, her hands clasped in front of her, as if waiting, as if she had all the time in the world. By the 3rd day, he had brought in a psychiatrist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a woman who specialized in veterans dealing with trauma. If Emma was delusional, if her mind had fractured and created this fantasy of service, Walsh would see it. She would unravel the threads. Instead, she emerged from the session pale and trembling, her eyes wide. "Ray," she said, That woman has lived through experiences that no one should endure. The way she describes captivity, the psychological markers, the scars on her memory. This is not a fabrication. This is lived trauma. You cannot fake the details of torture. Coleman rubbed his face, exhaustion clinging to every nerve. He had handled stolen valor cases for years. But Emma Carter was an enigma. One side of her file painted the picture of a ghost. No record, no benefits, no service listed, nothing but a mechanic from a small town. Yet in the interrogation chair sat someone who carried the voice of a soldier, someone whose eyes spoke of battles fought far away. She unnerved him most when she spoke of her training. Which part do you want to know, detective? She asked during one session, underwater demolition, advanced marksmanship, survival, and evasion. Or are you asking about the programs that do not have names? What programs? He pressed. Emma studied him, her eyes unreadable. If I told you, you would call me insane, or someone would silence you to keep secrets intact. Neither outcome seems worth it. Her restraint chilled him more than her claims. He had spent his career building cases, hunting down frauds, piecing together lies, but now he felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. One more step and the ground beneath his feet would give way. The breakthrough, if it could be called that, came when Emma finally revealed her arm. She rolled up her sleeve, showing scars that looked at first like jagged lines from accidents or burns. But as she traced them with her finger, Coleman realized they were not random at all. These were numbers carved into flesh, coordinates etched with cruel precision. Latitude and longitude. Emma said calmly, cut into my skin with broken glass during my 3rd month in captivity. One set marks the compound where I was held. Another marks the mass grave where they buried the others. Another marks a weapons cache they planned to use. Coleman leaned closer, his breath shallow. The scars were not haphazard. They aligned into neat sets, permanent reminders of a desperate attempt to preserve information in the only way she could, her own body. I remembered everything, she said, every face, every voice, every detail, because I knew someday someone would need it. The question is, detective, are you willing to verify it? He sat frozen, his mind racing. If she lied, she was the most dedicated fraud he had ever seen. If she told the truth, then something far larger was at play, something powerful enough to erase her from every record, something dark enough to leave her to rot in silence. For the first time in his career, Detective Michael Coleman realized he might be holding a secret that was never meant to see daylight, and the decision of whether to bury it or reveal it would change not only Emma Carter's life, but possibly his own. Admiral Michael Torres sat in his Pentagon office when the encrypted call came through. He had been reviewing endless budget reports, numbers blurring on the screen, when Agent Ramirez stepped inside. Her face pale, her voice low. Sir, we have a situation. The name that followed froze the Admiral in place. Emma Carter, age 34, arrested in a small Pennsylvania town for stolen valor, claiming to be former Navy SEAL team. The rest of the words dissolved into static in his mind. His coffee mug slipped from his hand, black liquid spreading across the reports like blood spilling across a map. Emma Carter was supposed to be dead, buried with 11 others from a mission that had gone so disastrously wrong it had been erased from existence. He had stood before grieving families, handed them folded flags, told them their daughters had fallen in service, his voice steady, his heart heavy, and now one of them had resurfaced, alive, in handcuffs. Within 2 hours, Torres was in his car, the road stretching between Washington and the small town blurred by thoughts he had spent 5 years burying. Unit 77 had been his secret, his creation, a program so deep in shadow that even most of the military never knew it existed. 12 women, trained for missions that required subtlety, infiltration, a perspective the traditional ranks could not provide. They had been his gamble on the future, and he had failed them, or so he thought. The Riverside Police Department looked ordinary. Red brick walls, faded lettering, the smell of stale coffee and old paperwork clinging to its halls. But to Torres it might as well have been a battlefield, for behind one of those walls sat a ghost he had buried with his own orders. Detective Michael Coleman met him at the front desk. The man's tired eyes and rumpled clothes spoke of sleepless nights. Admiral Torres, he said, his voice respectful but edged with suspicion. I am Detective Coleman. I was not expecting someone of your rank to walk in. Torres cut him off with a look sharp enough to silence a diplomat. You are about to step into waters deeper than you realize. Where is she? Coleman led him through the narrow corridors, his voice quick, his words tumbling. He spoke of Emma's calm under questioning, her scars, her impossible knowledge, the way she refused to break. Either she is the most dedicated fraud in history, he said, or she is telling the truth. Torres finished, his voice heavy with certainty. They stopped outside interrogation room 3. Through the one-way glass, Torres saw her. Emma Carter sat at the metal table, her hands folded neatly, her shoulders squared. Though her frame was small, her presence filled the room, even in plain clothes. Even after years of living a civilian life, she carried herself like a soldier, her back straight, her eyes alert. For a moment, Torres's chest tightened. He saw not the woman before him, but the memory of 12 warriors gathered in a briefing room years ago, their faces eager, determined, ready to walk into danger because he had asked them to, and among them Emma, younger, sharper, her eyes like flint, the best shot he had ever seen, the one they called Phantom. The weight of 5 years crashed down on him. 5 years of guilt, 5 years of silence, 5 years of believing he had sent them to their deaths. And now here she sat, alive, staring at nothing but the table before her. I need to see her alone, Torres said. Detective Coleman hesitated. Sir, this is an active investigation. Proper procedure requires. Torres turned his gaze on him, cold and commanding, the kind of look that had silenced generals and foreign leaders alike. Detective, what I am about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. That woman in there is not just a veteran. She is a weapon, a living, breathing piece of military hardware designed for missions beyond your imagination. If she is who I believe she is, then this is not about stolen valor. This is about something that could start a war. Coleman swallowed hard, his throat dry. What kind of war? The kind that never makes the news, Torres answered. He entered the interrogation room, closing the door behind him. Emma looked up, her eyes widening for the first time since her arrest. Admiral Torres, she said, her voice cracking as composure she had held for 3 days crumbled. They told me you were dead. They told me the whole unit was gone. Torres studied her carefully. She looked older, worn. The years had carved lines into her face. Yet beneath the civilian disguise lay the same soldier he remembered, the same Phantom. Show me your left shoulder blade, he said, his voice steady. Emma hesitated, glancing toward the one-way glass. Admiral, there are people watching. Show me, Torres pressed. She turned slowly, lifting the edge of her shirt. Beneath the butterfly tattoo, inked in later years, was the mark that froze Torres in place. A small anchor, a trident, and beneath it the number 77. Torres's breath caught. Jesus, he whispered, you are alive? Emma turned back, tears welling in her eyes. I've been trying to tell them for 3 days. Admiral, I've been trying to tell someone for 5 years. But no one believes me because I do not exist anymore. You made sure of that. The words struck him like a blow. Because she was right. He had been the one who ordered the cover-up, who had erased the unit from records, who had chosen secrecy over truth. He had thought it was the only way to protect the program, to protect the nation. But now, staring at Emma Carter alive and broken, he wondered if he had simply chosen to protect himself. Through the glass, Detective Coleman watched, his hands tightening around the edge of the file he carried. The Admiral and the prisoner locked in a silent battle of truth, guilt, and betrayal. This was not just an interrogation anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, something that could unravel secrets hidden for years. For Emma, the moment was more than proof of survival. It was vindication, a crack in the wall of silence that had entombed her for half a decade. And she knew with a cold certainty, the truth was finally stirring. And once it emerged, no one, not even Admiral Michael Torres, would be able to bury it again. The room was silent after the first rush of recognition, the air heavy with years of lies pressing down on both of them. Admiral Torres sat across the table from Emma Carter, the fluorescent light above them flickering faintly, as if even the building struggled to bear the weight of the moment. Emma's eyes were sharp, wet with unshed tears, yet burning with a fury that had been simmering for years. You erased me, Admiral, she said. You told my family I was dead. You gave me a false name. a false life, while I rotted in a prison cell across the ocean. Torres lowered his gaze for a moment, the weight of her accusation striking true. He had spent 5 years living with the decision, convincing himself that secrecy had been necessary, that national security outweighed the suffering of 12 women. Yet sitting here in front of Emma, he felt only the crushing guilt of betrayal. The mission was compromised, he said slowly, choosing his word with the caution of a man defusing explosives. We had reason to believe intelligence had been manipulated. Manipulated? Emma interrupted, her voice sharp. It was not manipulated. It was sold. Someone in your chain of command traded our lives for leverage. And instead of finding out who betrayed us, you buried us, you pretended we never existed. Her words were knives, and Torres knew they were not wild accusations. He had suspected it too. In long, sleepless nights, he had asked himself how the enemy had known exactly where and when Unit 77 would strike, but to acknowledge it publicly would have meant admitting the program existed, admitting that 12 women had been trained for missions so classified they had no names. The fallout would have been catastrophic. There are larger considerations, Torres whispered, his voice hollow, larger than the lives of 12 women who trusted you. Emma said, leaning forward, larger than the mothers you lied to, larger than the country we bled for. Torres felt the walls close in. The glass behind him reflected his own weary face. Lined with guilt, haunted by ghosts, Emma leaned back, her shoulders trembling. Then she spoke again. You want to know what really happened in Syria, Admiral? You want to know what your larger considerations cost? Torres nodded, despite himself. Emma's voice dropped, steady but cold. We inserted by submarine, swam 2 miles under cover of darkness, came ashore with perfect precision. The compound was exactly as the intelligence promised. The guard's position as predicted. It felt too perfect, but we trusted the intel. That trust killed us. She closed her eyes, remembering. The first explosion took out our comms. The second collapsed part of the building. By then, half the team was cut off. Within minutes, the ambush was complete. The enemy had planned every detail. They knew our tactics. They knew our approach. They knew us. Emma's hands shook, but her voice never faltered. They captured us alive. That was what they wanted. They wanted to study us, to test us, to prove that American women were not capable of holding under fire. They dragged us into cells, broke us down piece by piece. Torture, starvation, humiliation. Torres looked at her with pain in his eyes, his voice low. We tried to recover you. We tried every back channel, every negotiation, but the enemy refused. They did not want ransom. They wanted to prove a point. Emma's voice hardened. They made us watch, Admiral. Every time one of us broke, every time one of us screamed, the others had to watch. They wanted us to lose faith in ourselves, in each other, in the very idea of who we were. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the light, the only sound. But you never broke, Torres said at last. Not completely. Even when they thought they had broken you. You were planning your escape. Emma's eyes glistened. I spent weeks loosening a piece of concrete in the wall. Hours every night scratching away at it. When the time came I used it, I killed 3 guards. I ran 47 miles through hostile ground. Dislocated shoulder, broken ribs, internal bleeding, 3 days hiding by day, walking by starlight. I came out alive. Torres's chest tightened. Her escape had been legendary, though the legend had been buried with her name. You saved yourself, Torres said, and in doing so you saved the program. Emma frowned. What do you mean? Torres opened his tablet, entered a code that triggered alarms in multiple agencies. On the screen appeared files that should not exist, photographs, reports. Your escape led us to the compound. Torres explained. We followed your trail. Within 72 hours, we extracted the others. Emma's breath caught. The others. Torres nodded. They are alive. He showed her the photographs. Rodriguez working in Seattle as a nurse. Chun in Denver teaching martial arts. Williams running a bookstore in Maine. One by one, Emma saw their faces, older, changed, but alive. Tears spilled freely down her face. All these years, she whispered. All these years I thought I was alone. Torres closed the tablet, his voice heavy. We gave each of you new identities, new lives. We thought it would protect you, allow you to heal without the burden of secrets, but we were wrong. Emma's fury returned. You did not protect us. You condemned us. We were ghosts, alive but forced to grieve each other as dead. We lost everything. Our families, our names, our purpose. Torres bowed his head. I made the wrong call. I told myself I was protecting the program, protecting national security, but I was protecting myself, my career, my reputation, and in doing so, I destroyed the lives of the people who trusted me most. Emma stared at him, her eyes filled with fire. You cannot erase what happened, Admiral, and you cannot bury the truth forever. Torres lifted his gaze, his face hardening. Then let us fix it. Let us bring them back together. Let us make this right. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of years between them, the truth of betrayal and survival mingling like smoke. Emma's breathing slowed. Her anger did not fade but shifted into something else, a fragile ember of hope. What happens now? She asked. Torres leaned back, his voice quiet. Now we reunite the ghosts. Now we bring your team home. The world outside spun as if nothing had changed. Cars rolled through the evening with steady patience. Streetlights blinked awake one by one. Somewhere a radio murmured the weather. Yet for Emma Carter, the axis of everything tilted. In a single day, her name had been dragged through the mud and then quietly lifted out. The charges that pinned her to a table and a file and a rumor simply fell away. The report would say lack of evidence. The official stamp of nothing to see here, but Emma felt the truth like a current beneath her feet. A decision had been made far above the station walls, and the tide had turned in her favor. Detective Michael Coleman walked her to the exit with a face that tried to look neutral and failed. He had spent nights sitting with a puzzle that refused to align, and now a gloved hand from a room he would never enter had snapped the final pieces into place. He said little. He did not need to. The corridors smelled of coffee and dust. The fluorescent lights hummed. A door clicked open with a tired rattle. Beyond it, the evening air felt cold and clean. On paper, the woman called Emma Carter would be declared lost before sunrise. A car crash on Route 15, an obituary no one would read twice. In reality, she stepped into a second life, a name awaiting her that fit like a cloak, soft enough to move in and strong enough to hide her scars. Admiral Michael Torres stood a little apart, the kind of distance a leader takes when the ground is delicate and the wind is watching. He offered no grand gestures, no pomp, only a brief nod that carried the gravity of an oath. There was no speech to fix 5 years of silence. There was only an agreement woven in the space between them. We will repair what was broken, step by step, mistake by mistake, and we will begin now. Emma met his gaze and felt a quiet heat in her chest. Not anger, not. Yet forgiveness, something rougher and more resilient. The first threads of trust stretching, but not snapping. They drove in silence, the city lights giving way to long, dark roads, fences drifting past like shadows. The vehicle purred, the tires whispered on pavement. In the back seat, a small case sat buckled as if it were a person. Inside lay a set of documents that would become a bridge, a new name chosen for safety rather than deception, a wallet that would open doors without triggering alarms, credentials to pass through the world unremarked. The ghost would learn how to breathe as a citizen again. The soldier would learn when to move and when to be still. Emma watched the reflection of her face in the window, a woman unremarkable at glance. But under the surface, the currents had shifted. An old riverbed was filling with water. Purpose was returning like spring runoff. The facility waited beyond a wooded perimeter, wrapped in silence, the kind of place that did not need a sign to say keep out. Inside, corridors ran like veins, clean lines, secured doors, the hum of recycled air. Emma walked past cameras that blinked without curiosity, past rooms that smelled of antiseptic and faint machine oil. There were men and women moving with the practiced calm of those who understood that noise was a form of weakness. In a briefing room set with soft chairs and a wide table, a pitcher of water stood untouched, the surface perfectly still. Emma stood at the threshold and felt her stomach tremble. The door opened, and 12 lives collided with the present. First came a gasp that sounded like someone dropping an armful of plates, then footsteps, then the soft thunder of bodies closing distance. There were no words. There was a crush of arms and shaking shoulders, the awkward clatter of human beings who had practiced silence for years and suddenly could not hold it anymore. Emma pressed her face into a shoulder that smelled faintly of soap and disinfectant, a shape she knew as well as she knew the weight of a rifle. Rodriguez, alive, her pulse fluttering against Emma's cheek like a trapped bird. Another set of arms wrapped them both, a strength Emma remembered from long nights on cold floors. Chun, her breath tight and fast. Then Williams. Then more. The circle widened and closed and widened again, as if the room itself were inhaling and exhaling, grief and relief braided together. The years they had lost rose like smoke and drifted into the air where no one could cage them again. When the initial storm eased, they sat in a loose arc, not quite ready to form ranks, not ready to be anything but present, eyes red, hands clutching paper cups. The water finally poured and swallowed. The quiet grew deeper, a living quiet. Emma studied their faces, older and more weathered, each carrying new lines that mapped private battles. Yet she recognized the angles of jaw and glance, the shared way they scanned a room without thinking, the way their shoulders squared when events sighed, the way they tended to sit slightly forward, ready to move, ready to rise. Here they were, not dead, not erased, not broken beyond repair. Here they were, the unit that had been scattered like seeds, now beginning to root again. Torres entered without ceremony. He did not stand at the head of the table. He found a place along the curve and sat. He spoke in the soft tone of a man laying stones in a river to make a crossing. The program will be rebuilt, he said, not as a machine that grinds its own operators, but as a living structure with sight and conscience. There will be oversight that is not theater, support that is not a pamphlet, accountability that does not arrive only after headlines. The past cannot be unmade, but the future can be set on truer footings. The words did not wave flags. They did not promise miracles. They offered something rarer, the sober outline of change, the shape of a road that could hold weight. Paperwork unfolded for hours, signatures that did not feel like chains, forms that returned what had been taken, real names recorded again with steady ink, benefits reinstated, medical care not as a hush, but as a right, a team therapist introduced not as a guardrail against scandal, but as a partner in repair. Emma watched her teammates exchange small glances, the look of people hearing a language they had almost forgotten, the language of being seen, and each time a pen lifted from a page, a thread of the net that had held them down loosened and drifted away. Later, when the room emptied and the hall lights dimmed to a softer glow, Emma found Coleman's card in her pocket. He had slipped it there like someone leaving a coin at shrine. No message written, only a number, gesture that said if the ground rolls under your feet again, call. She smiled without showing teeth, grateful in a way that did not require words. Somewhere back in his small-town office, he would file a report that explained nothing and everything, a case dismissed for lack of evidence, a sense that evidence was not always the same as truth. That night would not make his career, but it might anchor his compass. Sleep did not come easily. The beds were comfortable, the sheets clean, but the body remembers what the mind cannot command. Emma lay awake counting her breath, listening to the subtle rhythm of air moving through vents, to a distant elevator chime, to footsteps that came and went with reassuring regularity. Just before dawn, she rose and padded to a quiet room with a window that faced a line of trees. The sky held the first rinse of light. She stood barefoot on cool tile and let the morning edge over the horizon. In that hush, she felt the ache of the years, the weight of every day spent under another name, the raw seam of absence that ran through her life like a fault line, and underneath it a new sensation, fragile but real, alignment like bones that had been set wrong, finally shifting into place. By midday, they gathered in a training hall that smelled faintly of rubber and metal, a space built for moving bodies through arcs and lessons, not to test them, but to reacquaint them with their own signatures. Slow drills began, nothing flashy, breath work, balance work, listening drills that tuned ear and attention. The old instincts returned in fragments, a stance remembered, a signal picked up without conscious thought. The first smile cracked across Rodriguez's face like ice giving way to water. A laugh escaped Chun's chest and startled her, then set off more. They were not preparing for deployment. They were learning how to inhabit themselves again. The unit was becoming a chorus rather than a rumor. In an afternoon briefing, Torres addressed the question no one wanted to carry any longer. The people who had sold the mission, the hands that opened the door to the trap. Justice moves slowly, he said, but it moves. Files have been pried open, names extracted, careers quietly dissolved, a chain of decisions traced like footprints through dust. Some consequences would be public and loud. Others would be quiet and surgical. Either way, the lesson would stand. You do not break what you are sworn to. Guard and walk away untouched. Emma listened with the steady attention of someone who understands that vengeance is a fire that burns every house on the street, but justice is a river that shapes the whole valley. Evening fell again, softer now. As if the building itself exhaled, the team ate together in a cafeteria that echoed with low conversation and the gentle clink of utensils. No one told stories to prove they belonged. Belonging was assumed, built by shared silence as much as shared words. After dinner, Emma walked a quiet corridor and paused at a glass case that held a folded flag and a small brass plate left blank on purpose. Absence preserved as a reminder of the cost of secrecy. She pressed her fingers lightly to the glass, not as a salute, but as a promise to the person she had been when she could not see a way forward. Then she turned away, not to forget, but to continue. Before lights out, Torres found her in the doorway of the training hall. He offered a file. Not thick, not heavy. Inside it held a plan drawn with care, phase steps for reintegration, medical schedules, counseling sessions, optional instruction blocks, mentorship for those who wanted to return to operational roles, pathways for those who wished to serve differently, advisory boards, training cadres, leadership roles that did not require vanishing into shadow. Emma took the plan and felt its weight in her hands, the opposite of a secret. This was an architecture of daylight, a structure designed to hold human beings and keep them whole. On the final page, a simple line waited, handwritten in neat block letters, "Welcome home." Beneath it, a space for a signature, not an alias, not a cover. Emma signed her true name slowly, each letter a rung on a ladder she had been climbing in the dark. When she finished, she did not cry. She breathed, deep and even, the way she had been taught to breathe when waves lifted and dropped and lifted again. Across the hall, she heard her sisters laughing at something small and ordinary and perfect. She walked toward the sound, her steps sure and unhurried. The ghosts were not ghosts anymore. They were women in motion, voices in a room, a unit with a future, and in a world that would never know their full story. That was enough for now. The ghosts had come home, and they were staying.